Redemptoris Mater, que per via celi porta males, et stella maris, succurre cadenti, surgere qui curat populo, tuque genuisti, natura mirante, tuum sanctum genitore, Virgo prius ac posterius, Gabrielis amore, sumensi laudare, peccatorum miserere.
Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities and alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast is to enjoy the January 2026 edition of Christian History and Ideas. This month we are looking at Aquinas, Chesterton, and modern lunacy. And as always, we pull from the august Postil website, which is down below. I'm down below too in my little postage stamp camera there. How are you doing? Welcome to the new year. Here is the Postil's site. Postil, tomato. And in any case, this fine website has all sorts of topics related to culture, faith, politics, both internal and geopolitical, book reviews, art, and on and on. It really is a college in text. If you read one article a day, you're pretty much getting a seminar in the humanities. And so there's a great crossover with Apocatastasis. And speaking of which, and given the audience, presumably, of this august series, Christian History and Ideas, I invite you, regardless of if you're enrolled at the college or anything of that nature, one and all, to join the staff and students of Apocatastasis online for the Divine Office during the week. I need to update this. As of recording, we're still on holiday until after the Epiphany, but the times will pretty much stay the same and the offerings as much. So you have the schedule here, and what you really want is this stable link. So at the appointed hours, you click that, and then you bookmark that, and then you keep coming back at the appointed hours. And we pray for all the intentions of the world, our relations, our nation, and so forth and so forth. In addition to that most necessary work, on this Divine Office page, there are a great many resources, many of them quite rare, concerned with the sacred liturgy, sacred scripture, and certain Western customs. So enjoy. Aren't you glad that you have places like Apocatastasis and websites like the Postil to remind you of the beautiful culture that we are the custodians of? So here we are. Our article is St. Thomas Aquinas, Chesterton, and the Lunacy of the Modern World, whence the title of this show is derived. The author is Boyd D. Cathay, and before we take one blessed step farther, we're going to have some background music, some seasonal background music. What should it be? It is still Christmas tide, and will be in fits and starts until Candlemas at the beginning of February. Should we have Feliz Navidad? No. Worthy though it be, what shall we do? Well, the old war horse of sunny mornings. That will be our background, and we'll check the audio and get on with it. Okay. So I don't know how sunny it is this January of recording, but anyhow, we're all good. So let's find out about our author. And you can see all of the books that are for sale from the Postil. They're going to be doing a lot more publishing, I understand, coming up. But it looks like there's enough already from other publishers you can buy through their store that'll keep you busy forever and a day. Howsoever, Boyd D. Cathay holds an MA degree, a Jefferson Fellow in History from the University of Virginia. If your name is Boyd, you better be coming from Virginia. And a Doctor of Philosophy, a Richard Weaver Fellow, in History from the University of Navarre, Pamplona, Spain. In 1971 through 2, he assisted Dr. Russell Kirk. His book, The Land We Love, The South and Its Heritage, was published in November of 2018 by Scuppernong Press. That is the greatest name I have ever heard. It's almost as good as Boyd. Okay, here we are. We're going to blow this up. Scuppernong Press. It sounds like something C.S. Lewis would come up with, you know, one of those troll hobbit names. Our piece of art, and the Postil editors are so handy with coming up with appropriate artwork for each article, is entitled St. Thomas Writing the Holy Sacrament. That is to say, the office of Corpus Christi. And you have all of these angel fellows and things. So there you go. There is an old saying that whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make go mad. In its original form, the phrase appears to date back more than 2 millennia to at least the Greek playwright Sophocles. But it was the 18th century English essayist and noble Latinist Samuel Johnson who gave it the more modern currency, rendering the phrase as quos Deus vult perdere, or those whom God singular wishes to cast off. Prius dementat, he makes demented beforehand, or as this gentleman translates, whom God would destroy, he first makes mad. Samuel Johnson, incidentally, has a fragment, what's called a fragment, perhaps an essay that never got made, but a few paragraphs got jotted down on the vocation of an academic. And sometime this month, I will be getting that worthy sentiment, however short it be, up on the page, the main page of ApocatastasisInstitute. Samuel Johnson, the essayist, says that ignorance in most men can be chalked up to idleness, and it can be excused. Ignorance in the academic, spelled with a K, is treason. Let that sink in. Those of us who have given ourselves to things of the mind, whether that's formally in the classroom or not, will remember that. Ignorance in the common man is excusable. Ignorance in the academic is treason. Who is it treason towards? Amongst other communities, our fellows, our society, those of us who have given ourselves to knowledge in whatever fashion, have an obligation to our surroundings. The phrase, in any case, seems to particularly apropos of our contemporary society. Indeed, there is a phenomenon that appears to infect much of modern society, and in particular, whole swaths of our American population. A kind of lunacy, a madness, which isolates the individual, that is, separates him from reality, from both the laws of nature and the divine positive laws of God himself. And we see a few things here. Part of being a lettered soul, and we all hope to be that. If you're watching this, I am making that assumption. Part of being lettered You could flip burgers. You could wash dishes, as I did for many, many years. You could scrub floors. It doesn't matter how mean the capitalists say your job is. You can still be a man of letters. And part of that is understanding the times and how our times are quite different from other parts of the world right now, and indeed from our own part of the world in times gone by. And one of those, coming from the Enlightenment, is the separation of knowledge and the separation of all life into cubby holes. The classical mind, as we're going to find out, is a symphonic thing, east and west. It is a symphonic thing. I should suggest that in the West, that correspondence, that integrity is more perfect, but nevertheless, East and West, before the Enlightenment, this was shared, and then after the Enlightenment, there is this cubby holding of all aspects of life. Not just in epistemology, knowledge, the study of knowledge and how we know what we know, etc., but also in sub-sciences, whether that's history or psychology or chemistry or whatever. Think of the periodic table. The classical mind, which was healthier than our mind for certain, was a symphonic mind. The medieval mind was as much. The medievals did not see themselves in contradiction to the past. We do. There's a great essay, when you're done reading all the articles on the Postil at least 4 times each, you can head over to Substack, and there's a 3-part essay entitled The 9 Worthies, published over the last 2 months or so. And that gets into the complementarity of the classical and the medieval world, and how the medieval Christians saw themselves as the inheritors, not the replacement of the classical world. Very much a distorted concept in America today. You have the vast majority of the secular world, as well as what might be called the New Age or alternative spiritualities, that see the arrival of Christianity as a foreign thing. And the type of Christianity is very Semitic in America. It's called Protestantism. It's a very radical type of Protestantism, which infects Catholics and Orthodox just as thoroughly in these United States. And from those people, you have a similar antipathy towards the classical world. Just like the secular world and the New Agers see the Christians as a break in tradition, and the modern so-called Christians in North America see the classical pagan world as inimical, enemy-ish. Both of us are incorrect. As a matter of fact, in the late classical world, and indeed in the medieval world, there was not seen to be this antagonism. That is a very modern concept, and it is sped up dramatically during the Enlightenment. The concepts are not novel and are not just found in Christian tradition. Natural law is found discussed at some length by Greek and Latin philosophers, examining the early texts of Plato, such as the Timaeus, the Gorgias, and the the Politeia. He declares that the well-organized and ideal society is one which would, quote, be established in accordance with nature, unquote. Aristotle is even more detailed, the great medieval, the man who was called the philosopher. The laws, Aristotle says, observable as operative truth in nature, in the world around us, are universal, quote, binding on all men, even on those who have no association or covenant with each other, unquote. These are natural laws. Cicero has a great way of putting it. It is not one thing. The natural law is not one thing at Rome and another at Athens, one thing today, another tomorrow. No, it is eternal and immutable for all nations and for all time. In the Christian West, during the High Middle Ages, this understanding of nature and the laws that regulate it was organized and given supreme exposition by the great Saint Thomas Aquinas. But Aquinas did not simply regurgitate the views and insights of Aristotle or Cicero, for he understood the great religious tradition and contributions of, quote-unquote, the people of the Pentateuch, the Hebrews of the Old Testament, who gave to Christianity an understanding of God's revelation and the existence of divine positive law that come from God and required our assent. So this is the synthesis not just of the past and quote unquote the present medieval order, but also especially the Hebrew tradition grafted in. This is why I say again and again that what we call Mediterranean Christianities, Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox, are an amalgam of Hebraic mythology and revelation, morality, and Hellenic thinking. Amongst the Catholics and Orthodox, that's much more of a balance. Amongst the Protestants, theoretically that exists, but there tends to be much, much more. Even the traditional magisterial Protestants of the continent, the Lutherans, for instance, theoretically, but in what becomes Protestantism, there's much more of a Semitic monism and hostility towards Hellenic thinking overall. But nevertheless, you have this merger. That divine positive law is in no way contradiction to the natural law. Indeed, it served to both confirm and refine it in its many applications, such as that much of subsequent Christian theology is based on an understanding of both and their agreement. A sinful act in respect to divine positive law is also a violation of the laws of nature. Just if you're not familiar, so divine positive law, well, here, I know positive law is like statutory law, but let's get a working definition here. Let's see, we've got a working thing here. Because I don't want to just give you the civil definition without... Okay, divine law is that which is enacted by God, made known to man through revelation. Let's take a look here. This is from Catholic Answers, a worthy outfit in California, America. Okay, divine moral aspect of divine law is that which is enacted. This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia, 1917, because that's out of copyright. It's also better in many respects. Meet here. We distinguish between the old law contained in the Pentateuch and the new law, which is revealed by Jesus Christ, is contained in the New Testament. The divine law of the Old Testament, or the Mosaic law, is commonly divided into civil, ceremonial, and moral precepts. The civil legislation regulated the relations of the people of God amongst themselves and with their neighbor. The ceremonial law of Moses regulated matters of religion and worship of God. The moral was a divine code of ethics, and this article we shall confine our attention exclusively to the moral precepts of the divine law. In the Old Testament, it is contained for the most part and summed up in the Decalogue. Okay, so when we speak of divine positive law, we're talking for our purposes of the moral law summarized in the Decalogue. So positive law, and I think this is shared in the civil sphere, right? Thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that, right? Where things are stipulated, and it's something we can see in the Ten Commandments there. So there you go. And here we go back. Okay, now we're not going to read every single blessed word of this. But we made our point. Of course, you will read every single blessed word. But we skip ahead a bit. We understand the symphonia in the medieval mind of not just past and present, not just in a sense, East and West, or the Hellenic and the Hebrew merger, but also that there cannot be this contradiction. Fundamentally, there cannot be a contradiction, and that cannot be from divine positive law. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God, thou shalt not kill. There cannot be a contradiction between that and natural law. So Cicero, as we said, says, how do we know the natural law? Well, it's the same everywhere. So if you go to China, you go to Australia, you go to Timbuktu, Africa, you go to Blessed Connecticut, you cannot steal. Nobody's putting up with that. You cannot murder. And there will be a cult. Even if it's a secular cult in modernity, there will be a cult. There will be a religion that is posited for the people. There will be a mythology. It might be a mythology from Marvel Universe and Disney World, whatever. Nickelodeon channel, right there. But every people will have a mythology that will be held by the society, whatever the case may be. That's a very distorted type of worship, but there it is. And you'll find the same in South Africa and France and so forth, right? There's no hangnails, not in the true divine positive law, neither in the natural law. There cannot be these contradictions. Everything must be in symphonia. And that brings me back, the author says, round to what we are witnessing today in America, the triumph of a quote-unquote counter-reality, which has long existed, sometimes in the fetid shadows, but has now shown itself visibly and publicly, as never before, as an advancing and dominating force in our cultural, religious, and political life. It is that counter-reality which I label a form of lunacy, because it is not in conformity with reality, that is, the laws of nature, divine positive law, and thus it ultimately perverts justice, truth, and true freedom. You can find crude examples of this in the largely successful attempts to normalize same-sex marriage and transsexualism, or institutionalize the tenets of feminist and woke liberation, whilst demanding our assent to such barbarities. In effect, such actions attack those whom I call normal people, quote unquote, persons who go about their business and perform their jobs, raise their families, attend church, pay taxes, and who accept, at least implicitly and normatively, those laws and limits of the laws of nature, in many cases incorporated in our historical constitutions. Parenthetically, I'll add, Freemasonic though they be, and enact laws of the land which flow from those Freemasonic, my edition, constitutions. I'm going to interject here, not to contradict our man, but to bring up, I think, a worthy critique of modern Western Christianities. And that is, you'll see it here, in fact, right? This focus on the sexual, the amorous, the bizarre when it comes to identity, whatever the case may be. I have no I have no problem with that observation that there is a disharmony. However, in the West, in the contemporary West, Christians of various denominations only focus on these sorts of things. And I want to ask, why is that? If we're going to talk about the medieval and classical heritage of Christianity, even the pagan heritage of Christianity, pursuant to that article, The Nine Worthies, the 3-part article on Substack, which you will read after you read everything on the Postil, after you read this, if we're going to hold up this old vision of Christianity, then we also need to understand the modern distortions, not just from the Enlightenment, but of modern Christianities. And that also, lest we get too cocksure, that also just as much, without any shade of difference, affects Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and that is in the moral order. Why don't Christians talk about, with nearly as much attention, shall we say, I don't know what. I mean, how do we group the erotic and the sexual identity thing? I don't know. Beyond the sex in the broad sense, not just hanky-panky, but, sexual identity. However you lump these together. Why don't modern Christians talk about this? Well, I think this does need to be brought up, is because we've lost so much ground in every other aspect of life. And also we are just as compromised by this, right? So I may not be running around with, I don't know, what's a good homosexual name? Well, here, let's see, the Islamic term for that is mukhana. Another project I have going on here. Well, I'm not running around with Mukhana. I'm not running around with Blaze. There's a good poor guy's called Blaze. I'm not running around with Blaze in San Francisco. Good. I'm such a holy Christian. I'm not dressing up in a tutu. Good, and fishnet stockings, which I have seen men in town here, so-called men, dressing as. in public. You should save the fishnet stockings for young women. It's much better look. But in any case, I'll behave myself. The point is, why do Christians give so much attention on, oh, well, I'm not contracepting, I'm not watching porno, I'm not in a poodle skirt? And they don't, and we don't talk about, well, I'm not involved in usury. Well, I'm not involved in legal personhood, which is blasphemous. I don't have a birth. Well, because we do, because we're completely compromised economically and legally, which in fact, and this is attestable in the Church Fathers and the medieval scholastics and their analogs at that time in the East, there has been a complete inversion of the Christian moral order in our day, where we're left clinging on to the very last, and in a certain sense, the very least significant aspects. The most individualized. You think we're not affected by the Enlightenment, right? One of the reasons you see Christians obsessed about sexual morality in our day, yes, it's in response to a secular West, which is obsessed, to use Pope Leo's words, in the last few months with sexual issues, particularly with sexual minority issues, a true disordered obsession. Yes, okay, fine. But conversely, it is also a sign of how much ground Christians have lost, because they cannot even entertain, even amongst themselves, they cannot entertain a moral order, a social Christian moral order, which would necessarily require discussions about the nature of this present legal system and the nature of this economical system. Those areas of life which previous Christians of the most orthodox persuasions concern themselves with. Nowadays, we who flatter ourselves with our orthodoxy, Catholic, Protestant, and capital O Orthodox, though we be, have completely forgotten. So all of that is to say, all of us need to take a humble pill and realize literally how very much ground we've lost, and that there is, and this is not to critique this author, there is a complete distortion of Christian moral dialogue, not because the sexual and sex identity stuff is incorrect. I am not saying that whatsoever at all. I affirm what the Holy Church affirms in this matter. But what I raise for deep consideration is the fact that we have been so broke back in the West, largely due to a lot of things. That's another discussion, but at least partially because of our own incompetent behavior. We have lost so much territory that we cannot speak about the more weighty and social aspects, and all of that is appropriate to the initial comments of this article and of myself in this episode, where we want that symphonia. The reality is we have lost things. We cannot even imagine a Christian social order because we're not willing to work for it. Because I need my child to have a birth certificate, and I need my social security number, and I need my bank account. And because of that, I am insecure, and I'm not even going to touch that third rail. It's easier to beat up on the dudes with lipstick. Anyway, but that normalcy goes much farther. For we have inherited traditions and beliefs, including religious beliefs, that incorporate divine positive law, which serve to govern our lives, even if at times we only give it lip service or attempt to circumvent them. In a real sense, it is that great chain of being, quote unquote, that accumulated past, and all it includes, that makes us who we are, that shapes us and gives us meaning. Thus, the Western tradition, understanding of property rights, of the inherent right to the family, the right to life, the sacredness of marriage, patriotism and love of country, and yes, the right to possess and own weapons. And don't ever use this form. Now I will contradict this good author. Never use the word firearms. Okay, firearms. This article is addressed to Americans. Presumably most of the people watching this episode are Americans. Never, ever, ever use the term firearms in regards to your arms or your guns. You should also never use the word weapons. Weapons are within the civil structure right now, the Freemasonic civil structure. A weapon is a tool of crime, right? If you were ever pulled over or walking down the street and a police officer who owns and holds no office asks you, do you have weapons in the car? You never answer yes, even if the back trunk is full of revolvers and rocket launchers. A weapon is always a tool of crime. Do not use your enemy's words. Also, the way that the attorneys have undermined the Second Amendment is by coming up with this bogus term called firearms. Firearms are not covered by the Second Amendment. Only arms are. Do not use the words weapons and firearms in regards to your guns and swords and so forth. Anyway, aren't you glad you tuned in? Now, having set this up in the article, if you found some of that a bit heady on the part of the author, I'm sure I've said nothing of great mention, but the author certainly lays things out nicely with Aquinas and certain classical authors well before him. Then he moves towards Chesterton, where in characteristic form, G.K. Chesterton, the British newspaperman, an author of the last century, I think he published some hundreds of books in his day, read many thousands, was always seen with books. I think he's almost like Teddy Roosevelt in the sense he could read a book a day. He's that kind of consumer in the true sense of literature. Anyway, there's a bit about Chesterton here. I'll leave it to you to read. And then Chesterton, on what account? Well, in the account of, rephrasing this in a very simple and approachable way. The lunatic is he who loses his way and cannot return. Chesterton says, the man who opened the birdcage loved freedom, possibly too much. But the man who broke the bowl merely because he thought it a prison for the fish, when it was their only possible house of life, that man was already outside the world of reason, raging with a desire to be outside of everything. Okay, so look at that, right? So you have your Aquinas, you have your Moses, you have your Cicero laying out this, and you have your Chesterton with these very relatable things of the birdcage and the fishbowl, all of which, all of those guys are talking about divine positive law in different ways. So it's interesting. You have, such a breadth of knowledge and a breadth in the same breath of ways to describe this reality. Natural law and the divine positive law provide a kind of roadmap, a secure, safe house for humanity. They have done so for 2 millennia. They are the basis of our civilization, and indeed, they are the only basis we have. We have no other, at least no other, that has been remotely successful. All right. So I have to boogie-woogie to a school function, in particular the Divine Office already mentioned. So hope to see you there soon enough. You can check out our website for that. That's down below, along with previous episodes, our article for this month as well. I just want to close up with Robert Frost's Black Cottage, which is referenced in this month's Postil article. I'll just read a bit of it. It's worth reading the whole thing, though. We chanced been passing by that afternoon to catch it in a sort of special picture. Among tar-branded ancient cherry trees sat well back from the road in rank lodged grass the little cottage we were speaking of. Up front, with just a door between 2 windows, fresh painted, be the shower of velvet black. We paused, the minister and I, to look. He made as if to hold it at arm's length, or to put the leaves aside that framed it in. For he said, come in, no one will care. The path was a vague parting in the grass that led us to a weathered willow sill. We pressed our faces to the pane. You see, he said, everything's as she left it when she died. Her sons won't sell the house or the things in it. They say they mean to come in summer here when they were boys. They haven't come this year. They live so far away. One is out west. It will be hard for them to keep their word. Away they won't have the place disturbed. A buttoned haircloth lounge spread scrolling arms under a crayon portrait on the wall, done sadly from an old daguerreotype. That was the father as he went to war. She always, when she talked about the war, sooner or later come and leaned half knelt against the lounge beside it, though I doubt if such unlifelike lines kept power to stir anything in her after all the years. He fell at Gettysburg or Fredericksburg. I ought to know. It makes a difference which. Fredericksburg was in Gettysburg, of course, but what I'm getting at is how forsaken the little cottage has always seemed since she went more than ever. But before, I don't mean altogether be the lives that had gone out of it. The father first, then the two sons, till she was left alone. Nothing could draw her after those two sons. She valued the considerate neglect she had at some cost taught them after years. I mean, the world's having passed it by, as we almost got by this afternoon. Tu autem Domine miserere nobis Deum gratias. I leave it to you to read the balance of Robert Frost's The Black Cottage, once again mentioned in the context of divine and natural law in our essay, St. Thomas Aquinas, Chesterton, and the Lunacy of the Modern World by Boyd D. Cathy on the Postil website. Thank you so much, and I indeed do have to run. I will catch you next month. Hopefully, I'll catch you in the meantime at the Divine Office, maybe in class here at Apocatastasis. Valete.